we want to move on to Karen Conti, our legal analyst, to get her reaction to today's news. And Karen,
keep that up,
as
though?
I am looking at, Terrence is talking about what people are saying on social media. This was a 5-4 ruling. It's being said it's the most significant change of an established constitutional right in the court's history. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with it. I mean, you just don't see the Supreme Court reversing itself. It doesn't happen very often. And this is a right that has been established, as you said, for 50 years all over the world. I mean, Colombia just passed a law allowing women the right to an abortion, and that country has had it criminalized for years. So this is a very, very, very important decision.
Yeah, and you know, I think this morning, you know, obviously we're hearing from people who say this is a great move forward for America, and those who say this is reversing course on a lot of years as well, especially for women in America, and worried about some of the things that could happen next. We're already hearing from a lot of people who are kind of tweeting out. President Obama even already issued a statement on Twitter saying today the Supreme Court not only reversed nearly 50 years of precedent, it relegated the most intensely personal decision someone can make to the whims of politicians and ideologues, attacking the essential freedoms of millions of Americans. Donald Trump Jr. saying, thank goodness for his father's picks for the Supreme Court. What is your feeling in hearing this on where we go forward?
Well, I try not to be political here because my lane is the legal lane. I certainly have my opinions, but I think what we need to look at is if you attack the right to privacy, which is what Alito did, saying there is no such thing as a right to privacy. And because our founding fathers didn't discuss abortion, that the federal government can't, uphold these kinds of laws. Well, you know, that's kind of strange because we certainly didn't have Facebook when the founding fathers were writing the Constitution. So, it's obviously a political decision here. The politics go all the way up. We have to look at the ramifications. What about contraception? That was based on the right to privacy. What about interracial marriage, gay marriage? In vitro fertilization, women use that, and millions of women use that. And if there is an inception, if a fetus, life begins at conception, then what are we going to do? We're not going to have in vitro. So we have all these different protections that are going to topple if the states now want to pass laws that violate that right to privacy.
I want to go back to those other things you just mentioned, gay marriage, contraception, interracial marriage, in vitro, because with the anxiety the way it is in this country right now, of course, we try to stay in the moment with this decision. But again, I cannot stress how many people on social media are already fearing what's next. How soon could any of that happen, do you think? That these other rights would be, I don't want to say targeted, but they will be the focus of the court?
Well, I mean, certainly Illinois is not going to be one of them, but states in the South, I mean, sure. I think that, the politicians are going to take advantage of this and take advantage of maybe the conservative people who believe that these things should not happen. And I think we're going to see challenges to gay marriage first, probably, since that was the last right that was decided based on right to privacy. I can't imagine they're going to outlaw birth control, but I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, let's talk about what, if any, move the president could make, because he obviously is against this. Is there a move he could make, such as an executive order, that would somehow change this?
I don't think that he has the right to issue an executive order that would reverse this. It's very technical, and I think you're going to have legal people give you different answers on this. I think what we're going to see is Biden is going to pass some executive orders that will assist women in getting an abortion in other states and make it easier for them to be transported, et cetera. But I don't think that executive order can be issued that overturns the overturning of Roe versus Wade.
Well, Karen, we appreciate, all the time whenever you join us to kind of go over these issues and kind of dissect them. What do you think, just people, obviously you have a legal mind, but people who are listening right now that are just like, what just happened? Can you just break this down for us? Like, what actually is taking place from here and what is not, that maybe a lot of people have a misconception about?
Well, obviously there are laws in all the states relating to abortion. And up until today, Roe versus Wade said that a woman has an absolute right to an abortion in the first trimester, and then there were different ramifications in the different trimesters thereafter. Now that Roe versus Wade is no longer in place, that means that 13 states have trigger laws, which mean there will be no abortion in those states. 26 states will likely outlaw abortion altogether. And then there are about 16 states that have protections like Illinois that say you cannot ban abortion. So when you take away that right that the Supreme Court has determined 50 years ago, and the court says now the states can make their laws relating to abortion as they see fit, then you have the states having a variety of different ramifications, as far as, is there a right to an abortion? Is there a right when a woman's life is threatened? Is there no right at all to abortion in case of incest and rape? I mean, you're going to have all different state laws that are very, very, very different depending on the political makeup of the legislators.
It's obvious there are some people, we should definitely say this, that think this is a victory. They've been fighting for this for a long time. But recent polling has shown that the majority of Americans actually don't necessarily agree with what the Supreme Court is doing today. Obviously, the Supreme Court is making its decisions based on law and not on public opinion. So what in fact can be done as far as when it comes to the public and the protesting, if the president cannot issue an executive order? Where do you see that there could be any way for those who are against this, for this to be chipped away at so we could go back to the way it has been?
Well, it's all about voting, right? It's going to be voting people into Congress who will pass a law. And again, I'm not even sure the Congress could pass a law legally that would overturn this. But certainly there could be a constitutional amendment, but again, you have to elect the people into office that will facilitate that. And certainly state to state, people are going to vote one way or the other. And are they going to vote specifically on this issue? A lot of people feel very strongly about it. Some people not so much. So this is all about voting, Sylvia. It's all about, if you feel strongly about this, elect people who think the same way you do.
Karen, I just got a question from someone on Facebook. They say, can a state bar a resident from traveling to another state to a ban to obtain an abortion?
That's a good question, and I think some states have already said they're going to do that. So that those questions are going to go up to the appellate courts, and my opinion, just from knowing what I know, is that it probably would be unconstitutional to make going to another state to afford yourself of rights in that state something that's a criminal action. That would be against our Constitution. But that doesn't mean that states aren't going to try to do that.
So Karen, we have this week has been kind of monumental in terms of some of the legal cases that have come forward. When you had Title IX that was being discussed at 50 years, and now Roe versus Wade that's been overturned, and we had the decision on gun rights for New York at least. Why do you think all of this is kind of coming to a head right now?
Well, the court issues its most important opinions right at the end of their term, which is coming up at the end of this month. And most of these decisions are very controversial. So it takes them a long time to get their opinions out because they want to make sure that they are as solid as they can be. And there's going to be dissents and concurrences, which are different opinions that the Supreme Court justice is right to criticize the majority opinion. So it takes a long time to get these controversial issues and these controversial opinions issued. So that's why we're seeing all these really important decisions coming down right about now.
So we talked a little bit about what other rights, and people are concerned what other rights might be affected by this, including gay marriage and contraception. If you can explain, how specifically does this ruling affect those?
Well, the right to privacy was what let's just start at the beginning. Right to privacy is not in the Constitution, but the justices many years ago said that there's a combination of constitutional amendments that give people a right to privacy, a right to have contraception, a right to the anti-sodomy laws, the interracial marriage laws, that you have a fundamental right to do what you want with your body, and that's a right to privacy. When the Supreme Court issued Roe versus Wade, it relied on that right to privacy to say that a woman has a right to do with her body as she pleases up to a certain point. And so all of these decisions then, like gay marriage and the decisions that have followed, are based upon that right to privacy. So when Roe versus Wade is stricken down, that right to privacy, it may not exist according to our current Supreme Court. So therefore, there are going to be challenges to all of those cases that have come down subsequent to say, hey, if that topples the abortion, then gay marriage has to topple too.
Okay, Karen.
So one of the things that we're already starting to see some, the concurrence that you were speaking of a moment ago, and a lot of people are already, you see the protesters already out. People were ready to react to this on either side very quickly, in large part because of the leaked draft here. But some folks are saying, okay, time to expand the Supreme Court quickly. Can you explain, because that's already been a controversial issue, what the controversy surrounding that idea is?
Well, the Supreme Court can be expanded. There's nothing illegal about that. But the question is that in our country's best interest? Does that make us look unstable? Now, that's a decision that the executive branch is going to have to ponder. Again, you don't want to change the structure of our system based upon one bad ruling, right? If that's how you think about this. The real way to attack this is by the ballot box. And if the majority of Americans think Roe versus Wade is an important right, then they should go to the ballot box and elect people who are going to stand up for that right. To expand the court, again, I'm not saying one way or the other if that's a good or bad thing, but I think once you start to change fundamental structures of our government, then it really I don't think it's a good look for stability purposes.
Okay, Karen Conti, thanks so much. We always appreciate your
All right.
perspective.